I wanted to watch this interview that David Pakman had with the Q Anon Shaman. So the Q Anon Shaman is not only out of prison, he's been released on parole, or he's been released early from prison. And now that he's out of the slammer, he's decided he's going to run for office. He's running for Congress as a libertarian. Since he's running as a libertarian, I would say his odds of success are obviously extremely low. Not to mention, as far as I know, he doesn't have much political skill to speak of. So I don't think it's really gonna go anywhere. He might get a bunch of donations from people online. But it does show that the QAnon Shaman is not taking the advice of many commentators who didn't want to see him become a spectacle once he came out of prison of, hey, just lay low, return to your normal life, and see what you can do with the rest of your days on Earth outside of the public perception of the QAnon Shaman. No, he's leaning into it. He's connecting his real name to his QAnon Shaman name as much as possible. He's still leaning into the fact that he's a shaman. He's not backing down whatsoever. He's doubling down and running for public office. And this is really bad, probably for, just, his livelihood, him having a productive use of his time, him trying to remove himself from his past crimes, as in making it look like he's resentful and that he isn't a danger. But on the other hand, it's also kind of funny. So I'm torn, but we're gonna watch it anyway. Let's see.
Today, we welcome to the program Jake Angeli Chansley, who's a spiritual activist, shamanic practitioner, published author, entrepreneur, known to many in our audience, I'm sure, as the Q Shaman or QAnon Shaman. He was convicted and served some time for his role in the...
Gotta say, love the American flag background. Very brave.
January 6th Trump riot.
He really knows how to stand for something.
Which I am sure we will also talk about. I really appreciate your time and you being here.
I don't know why I'm so sassy today. I have no problem with the American flag.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I think it's more like the deep state setup riots than Trump riots. I don't think Trump had people do that. I think it was more likely that the feds and the crowd and Antifa and BLM were largely responsible. And the police throwing tear gas and concussion grenades into a peaceful crowd, that probably had something to do with it too.
Well, hold on. Let's go through piece by piece, because we have plenty of time to get to everything if we just do it sequentially.
Okay, so I was at January 6th. There's a lot of talk about there being feds in the crowd. There might have been feds at the crowd. There were a lot of far-right groups at January 6th, and I would imagine that in some of those far-right groups, there might be fed informants in there, plants to keep either monitors on them because they're militias, and many of their members may have said statements in the past that could be considered like borderline threats of terror or stuff like that. So I wouldn't be that surprised if there were feds in the crowd. Now, that wouldn't surprise me. But I've seen no evidence online that federal agents were the ones who initiated the violence, pushed it forward at every stage. But I have seen good video evidence that the Proud Boys and other groups like that, while on the front line between the protesters and the cops, would push forward the violence, tearing down police barricades, tearing down barriers and gates that separated protesters, Capitol staff, and police officers, pushing forward and egging other people on into violence that pushed them closer and closer and closer into the Capitol before they busted in the windows, beat up the cops, injured tons of police officers and staff and Capitol staffers before moving in to the police, moving into the Capitol through both broken windows and different doors. So I saw that. I saw it from a distance. I saw people walking towards the Capitol and hearing people talking about like, hey, they're rushing the Capitol. They're rushing the Capitol. And when people said, hey, they're rushing the Capitol, people went to go check out the Capitol, either to watch it unfold or to join in the rushing. And all those people who heard, oh, they're rushing the Capitol, then ran into the Capitol, then ran inside of the Capitol. They knew what they were doing. But I didn't see any evidence that the feds were doing it. Could they have done it and I just missed it all? Possibly. But when people throw that out there, yeah, I think it's from a desire to not admit that, wow, I thought it was the lefties that are the violent ones. I thought it was the Antifers. I thought it was the Black Lives Matters. And now it was all these mom and pop conservatives that we thought respected police officers, who were violent with police officers, causing permanent injuries to multiple police officers and leading to the deaths of multiple officers, either through the events of the day, according to coroners believing that the events of the day, killing people like Brian Sicknick, you can go check the coroner's report if you want to, or leading to deep psychological problems for multiple officers, leading to at least 1 or 2 officer suicides, or at least believing to have contributed to 1 or 2 officer suicides.
So in court, through your lawyers, as I reviewed the records, to some degree, you made the case that you were there because of Trump, right? So I'm interested in this conflict between clearly Trump did motivate you to be there, but also you're saying it was Antifa and the FBI. But aren't you evidence that that's not the case, Jake?
Well, my previous lawyer misrepresented me in pretty much every single way.
So, you denounced the arguments made by your lawyer.
Well, yeah, on a number of different occasions. He said things that I never asked him to say. I never felt duped by Trump, never said that. I'm not mentally ill, not bipolar, schizophrenic, delusional, or, depressed. None of that's true. Okay,
so your view as of today, regardless of the...
Man, that's a big reversal. So in that court case where we got on our where we sat down and told the doctor that, hey, look, I'm crazy, I'm schizophrenic, I'm bipolar, I was duped, I'm just a dummy head, I'm just stupid, and then they threw me in the slammers, and now that I'm out, all that stuff I said about me being stupid, no, I'm actually very, very intelligent, I'm not crazy at all, it's just a deep state conspiracy, which is a thing a not crazy person would say to show that they're not crazy. Okay, I'm on the same page now.
Argument that was made in court is that the events of January 6th were carried out by, tell me which groups it was again?
Well, it's actually, if you look at it objectively,
yes.
You look at the setup that was very clearly there from a very early stage. Prior to January 6th, what you're going to find is that largely the parties...
You know what was interesting is I don't watch a lot of conspiratorial documentaries. I have very, very little respect for conspiracy theorists generally. That's not to say that there's not ever a good interest to question the truth or that conspiracies are never true. It's just that most of them that I've dug into, I find very little weight behind, and I get frustrated that people dedicate so much time trying to prove things that are obviously nonsensical, like the comet ping pong, when there's real child sex trafficking going on in the world. Why do you need to make up so many conspiracies about child sex trafficking when there's real child sex markets you could go try to target, bring attention to, and break up? It's aggravating, but man, I lost my train of thought immediately. Oh my goodness. Speaking of horses, Vosh raid incoming. Oh, a Vosh raid. Why, thank goodness. I appreciate it. Thank you. Pizzagate is real. Yeah, Pizzagate is real. There's questioning stuff and there's making a delusion for yourself to be the hero. Yeah.
Responsible would be people like Mitch McConnell, Nancy Pelosi, Yogananda Pittman, Mark Milley in the Pentagon, Christopher Wray in the FBI, and people in Antifa and BLM.
How is
Antifa? The thing is, I remember hearing the Antifa stuff, but the Antifa stuff fell apart very quickly, because the Antifa story I remember from immediately after the Capitol riots, because I didn't see any Antifa there. And in fact, I remember hearing from the usual Antifa groups, and knowing a few of those people, knowing a few of the Antifers, the general idea was, hey, this is going to be a much bigger protest than usual. The signs we are seeing are quite troubling about how it could get violent. So we're going to step back. And then I didn't see any. I saw a few counter protesters every once in a while, but nothing coordinated, nothing really that organized. And it seemed to all be stuff away from the Capitol steps, deeper into the city itself. So I saw no proof of it. I saw no evidence of it. I've seen nothing compelling. And the only thing I remember where somebody tried to actually make the case for Antifa being behind it was Matt Gaetz. And the way Matt Gaetz made the case is he said that there was a website that had used face tracking technology, and it had clicked and dinged one of the people or a few of the people at the rally to a website connected to Antifa. Now, when I hear a website connected to Antifa, of course I'm suspicious, because like, which Antifa group? Because there's not like a centralized Antifa website, centralized Antifa command. It was some smaller Antifa group that had a list of people on their website that they considered Nazis and fascists, like people who were part of like the American Nazi Party, stuff like that. And their faces got picked up and dinged because they were at the event. Fascists and certain neo-Nazis, stuff like that. It wouldn't make sense for Antifa to take pictures of themselves and post it on the internet, when the whole idea about Antifa and Black Bloc is it's anonymous and you work as part of a crowd. It wouldn't make sense that they would post like, hello, I'm the CEO of the Brooklyn Antifa. Like, that doesn't make much sense. But that was the only time I saw anybody in elected office or anybody with a real position of power push this theory, attempting with evidence. Then there was the Tucker Carlson documentary. I did see that, and it didn't present any evidence. It asserted that it was a deep state plot, but it just did so by bringing people on who said, it could have been a deep state plot. You know, like, the feds have a history of doing sus stuff, and that was it. There was no evidence attached to it. It was very annoying.
You know,
it was like a 45-minute documentary too, and it had nothing.
That any of that is true. What evidence do you have, for example, that Nancy Pelosi was involved in what happened that day?
Well, because if you look into the testimony of former Capitol Police Chief Sund, he had his emergency powers revoked by Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell prior to the January 6th events, and they had to go. He had to go through them in order to deploy the National Guard. And when he gave the written request for National Guard to be present, they denied it because it would be bad optics and there was lack of evidence. But the evidence was all there. He was just not given the evidence by Yogananda Pittman, by the FBI, and by the Pentagon. And that's according to his own testimony. That's also according to the testimony of former Capitol Police Lieutenant Tarek Johnson.
Yeah, I've reviewed their testimony and was not able to find that. It's sort of beyond the scope of this interview to look at it line by line. I guess big picture, Jake, why do you think that parties that supported Joe Biden would try to interfere with Joe Biden being made president? Why would they do that? It seems counterproductive, doesn't it?
Well, the thing is what you have to understand is that
it would be the idea is it's a false flag. It's supposed to make Trump supporters look bad, or that it was meant to derail like the legitimate efforts of Donald Trump to stop the steal.
It was about creating a setup so that a psyop may ensue, and the weaponization of the Justice Department, the DOJ, could then be used to go after Trump and his supporters.
But that's just a word salad, Jake. It doesn't address the crux of the question, does it?
No, it does. It does.
How?
And just allow me to address it. So, because of the events of January 6th, there have...
I mean, Trump has committed so many... He's on trial for so many different crimes. It doesn't seem like they really needed January 6th to go after him. I mean, Donald Trump took classified documents, left the White House, didn't unclassify them, and then when the National Archives came for them and were like, hey, can we have the documents back? He was like, oh, I have some of them, and then tried to hide the other ones, having his staff turn off the cameras in his complex to try to hide the footage of him moving the documents around while he's showing it to people without clearance, invasion plans of Iran that has never been declassified, that he acknowledges on tape has never been declassified. That's one of the crimes. There's many other crimes. If a lawyer wanted to throw the book at Donald Trump, it seems, from my view, all they need to do is just watch Donald Trump behave for a little bit. For example, even after committing all these crimes, he continues to violate the judge's decisions of like, hey, don't engage in witness intimidation, before immediately then going on social media and engaging in what could easily be interpreted as witness intimidation. And his lawyers and all of his colleagues can't seem to reel him in. They can't seem to do anything about it. if it was a setup to go after Donald Trump or go after Rudy Giuliani, just seems like a whole lot of waste of, well, a waste of time, really.
Been multitudes, thousands of Trump supporters that have been labeled domestic terrorists. And
because they showed up and committed crimes, though, right? Or you're saying they were tricked into doing so? But
with respect, David, that's not the same thing as committing acts of domestic terrorism in the way that there has been acts of domestic terrorism committed, say, for over 200 days.
I do want to throw out there that there were pipe bombs placed outside of the DNC and the RNC. They didn't go off. They didn't kill anybody, thankfully, right? But if, just throwing this out there, if we found out some ISIS guy did this, or something along those lines, would we be calling it terrorism? Would we not be calling it terrorism? Just saying.
All over the country during the 2020 riots by Antifa and BLM, who claimed in their own,
like, if it's like protesters scuffling with cops, it's one thing, but once you get into territory like that, or once you get into planting bombs outside of political buildings, preluding large-scale like mass events, like then you're getting into a really dangerous territory.
On their own websites, that they wanted to overthrow the American capitalist
that's
system.
A non sequitur. That's I have to interrupt, Jake. I have to interrupt, Jake, because what you have to understand is, imagine that I was accused of attempted murder. It is of no importance whatsoever if a year prior someone else somewhere else also tried to kill someone. I can't use that as my defense. And what you're saying is that part of the defense of what the people on January 6th did is your perception of what BLM did a year earlier. That's not a valid defense.
No. What I'm saying, dude, is this.
Okay.
What we're talking about here is optics. Okay, and they tried to make me, in particular, look as bad as humanly possible. They used all sorts of trigger words and trigger.
The guy who dressed up in face paint and shirtless and covered in furs and buffalo horns, going yoda 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 yoda, even chanting and beating a drum on the Capitol steps, calling himself a shaman. Before marching into the Capitol, saying that deep state forces had stolen the presidency from Donald Trump. No, he needed no help looking like a fool, okay? He is a professional.
Images to put a label on me and many other Trump supporters to circumvent our constitutional rights and to basically centralize power and use the levers of power in government to go.
One second. I'm just sorry. I'm 1 second. I just gotta do something quick. I just need to, can we get a good image of him from the event? Okay. Imagine you're a reporter. This guy walks up to you after charging out of the Capitol. After, the Capitol he just stormed into, he walks up to you and then he, like, looking like this, stung out, like, walks up to you, then just changes emotion and was like, hi, could we have an interview about my political persuasions and why I decided to go into the United States Capitol? I want to be taken seriously today. Come on. You cannot dress like this and then make the complaint that you weren't taken seriously and then people were making fun of you. Could you know that guy that goes to political rallies dressed as Batman? Or maybe there's multiple people that go to political rallies just dressed as Batman to just be Batman at the political rallies.
Immoral.
I mean, I don't think anybody would understand if he, while doing that, dressing up as Batman going to political rallies, was taken aback by the fact that nobody took him seriously. Paul Mamba, thank you so much for the tier 1. Appreciate it.
Go after their political opponents.
Okay, let me ask you a real practical question about that. You're talking about being designated domestic terrorists. I want to be super specific here because I really want to understand your view on this. These cases like yours were federal cases.
Yeah, I do just quickly. I just want to throw out there are some people who seriously think that this guy is like QAnon's Nelson Mandela. He was deeply persecuted for simply just wandering in to the people's house, man. I just like to appreciate the diversity of perspectives in this world.
There is no official designation of domestic terrorism by the U.S. federal government. So who labeled you as such and where?
The Mockingbird media did, all over the news, number one. And number two, are you telling me that when, say, the government is designating institutions like, say, the Proud Boys or the Oath Keepers as domestic terrorist groups, or anybody for that matter that was flying into D.C.? I don't know if you're aware, but anybody that flew into D.C. in early January of 2021 is now being followed around by the U.S. Marshals on airplanes, and there are no U.S. Marshals on the FAA, on the airplanes all across the country because of this label.
You're doing a lot of whataboutism and changing topics.
This isn't whataboutism.
Let's just try. Hold on, Jake. Hold on. Let's conduct this interview in a sensible way. Okay. Let's stick with one of the things you.
Okay. So first off, I know that the Proud Boys were declared terrorists in Canada. I don't know if you guys knew that, but the Proud Boys are considered a terrorist organization in Canada, and so they're banned in Canada. But they're not considered a terrorist organization in the United States, as far as I'm aware, even though multiple of their members were arrested and are going to be serving a long time behind bars for their participation in January 6th and them trying to organize, an interruption of the inauguration, not the inauguration, but the process of transition from one president to the other. So I mean, that's going to happen, but I don't know about their organization itself being declared a terrorist organization. I know it was in Canada, not in the United States. As for the other thing about air marshals following around anybody who flew in, I didn't flew into January 6th. I just got on the train and went in there because I live in the DC area. I'm from the area. And I got to say, one part of January 6th that I really appreciated was getting to talk to people while the violence was going on and talking to them like, hey man, we live here, why are you busting up our community? And seeing the gears in the head, like them never being put in that position before, because they're usually assumedly in the position of in their chair watching Fox News as the BLM rioters are tearing down the community. And now that the positions have changed, they didn't know how to respond to it. And usually it just produced a lot of frustration. It was really interesting, people watching that day, which is what I spent the last few hours of the day doing.
You said when we finish with it, we'll go to the next thing, okay? You said that many of the people charged for their alleged involvement on January 6th have been designated as domestic terrorists by the weaponized DOJ. I then said to you, there is no such designation by the U.S. government in the legal proceedings that you're talking about. So what do you mean they were designated domestic terrorists by the weaponized DOJ? You said, well, the Mockingbird media did it. So are you ready on... Hold on.
You talked about me.
Let me finish the question.
You said who labeled you that, and that's what I'm saying. Well, the Mockingbird media did.
You first said that the weaponized DOJ issued that label. When I told you no such label exists, you said it was actually the media. So from a legal standpoint, no one has designated
you're mixing
you.
It up. That's not the case at all.
Okay.
What it is that I was saying what it is that I'm saying is that the DOJ has labeled numerous Trump supporters that were there on January 6th, and some people that weren't even there on January 6th, as domestic terrorists. And you
labeled them how and where?
Wow, there was somebody just sitting home watching January 6th on their couch, and they were like, you get them. And the FBI has been hunting them down through every quarter of the earth ever since. What do you mean, people that weren't at January 6th? I would love to hear this. I would love to hear the story. What, did they participate in planning, like an entering of the Capitol building, or were they just completely unaffiliated with the event whatsoever? And the cops are just like, he's too based and too red-pilled. Get him. Like, what do you mean, not at January 6th? How are they arrested for January 6th, not at January 6th? Okay, whatever.
I'll tell you. You can look into the testimony of Stephen Friend, the FBI whistleblower who came forward and was talking about how it is that the FBI is designating these people as domestic terrorists and then handing these cases to FBI field offices all over the country, instead of treating it like it was one incident on one day at one location. And in this way, they're actually expanding their domestic terrorism investigations all over the country, creating the illusion that there is some sort of domestic terrorism threat from white Trump supporters.
Listen, it seems as though I don't want to spend the whole interview on this. As of 2 weeks ago, none of the individuals involved in the January 6th riots have been designated as domestic terrorists. There is no specific domestic terrorism statute, and none of the individuals that you're referring to have actually been designated in that way by the DOJ.
That can't be the case, because if that was true, then that would mean that the Q Anon Shaman guy was full of shit, and that can't be the case.
Well,
people have heard your opinion. Hold on.
But David,
people heard your opinion. Now they've heard mine.
What about the terrorism enhancements that are being placed on their plea deals? Are you telling me that that isn't a classification?
There just is no such classification. If you want to give me a specific case, Jake, hold on.
Having these terrorism enhancements on their plea deals.
I would be glad to look at that and give my opinion, but you made a different claim to start with. That's a different claim altogether. Okay, it's just a different claim. It's just not the claim. Let me ask you this. You've said that some of the things said by your lawyer during your trial are not things you agreed with. Fine. Do you acknowledge?
What does that sound?
Acknowledge that you did something wrong on that day and that you are the sole person
like a QAnon shaman lives in a big tree and it's a woodpecker. What is that?
Responsible for that?
Do you guys hear that?
Yes, I've said that on several occasions. If you do your research, I've accepted responsibility. I've said that I broke the law. I should not have broken the law, and I've done my time. And, I'm out now because I did my time and I had good time and good behavior in prison.
Just so you know, there's like a rattle going in the background. I don't know if you hear that. Oh, it just stopped. Do you blame anyone other than yourself for inducing, entrapping, or goading you into doing what you did on that day?
Yeah, because originally during the case, and they talked about this briefly earlier, his legal argument was that he was duped by Trump, that he was duped, he was fooled, that he's crazy. I mean, he didn't say crazy. He was talking about bipolar, schizophrenia, but basically the idea is that he was cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, and that combination of factors led to him doing what he did on January 6th. But if he's saying that he wasn't duped anymore, then that kind of undercuts, like half of his, a good chunk of his legal argument as to why he shouldn't have an extensive sentence.
Not at all.
Just plain and simple. You don't blame anybody else.
No, I take full responsibility for my actions.
Okay. When it comes to some of the views that you have been associated with, I've seen, again...
So that was just some sly talk from his lawyer then. Okay. Well, it's to be expected.
This is from things your lawyer has said, so you tell me if you don't agree, that you have distanced yourself from, the QAnon Shaman.
Dylan, nice not mocking sick people. Look, if I couldn't mock anybody because they had mental problems of any sort, then I couldn't talk about politics.
When it comes to some of the views that you have been associated with, I've seen, again, and this is from things your lawyer has said, so you tell me if you don't agree, that you have distanced yourself from the QAnon Shaman stuff. You don't consider yourself a follower of QAnon. Is that true?
Well, QAnon is a label and a straw man created by the Mockingbird media, and they called me.
So Q, not only was January 6th the psyop, but QAnon, a big part of January 6th, that was also, they were also psyoped as well. They're also psyoped. Man, how do we know that Jacob Chansley isn't also a psyop? How do we know that the person who wasn't in Fed custody is now, this is not a replicant of Jacob Chansley. This is a lizard person. How do we not know that?
QAnon Shaman, and had the audacity to say that's what I called myself. So
what I'm asking you is just about the views, not the label.
Well, dude, that really all depends on what you think Q views are. What do you think Q views are?
I think the biggest overriding view is that diverse. There is a sort of conspiracy of child abuse and pedophilia that is carried out by so-called elites, the deep state and Democrats, which Donald Trump was chosen by God to become president and then stop.
Okay, so I don't necessarily agree with all of that, but
Okay.
if you look into Jeffrey Epstein and what he was doing, if you look into the finders, if you look into the Franklin cover-up, if you look into the testimony of Ronald Bernard, if you look into the Barney Frank scandal, if you look into the Michael Aquino military base scandals, if you look into the numerous scandals that are coming out now regarding all these people that debunked Pizzagate, and now they're being arrested and charged with child porn charges and child abuse charges, then it's quite clear that there is some sort of an elite sex trafficking pedophilia ring in DC, in Hollywood. If you look into the testimony of Corey Feldman, if you look into the testimony of a lot of these young people that were groomed in Hollywood and raped at young ages, then it's quite clear that there is some sort of elite child sex trafficking going on.
So you do believe that?
I do like when someone builds a case by not getting into any of the details of any of the cases and just saying, look into all this stuff. Like, what if like, instead of, building a case about the Russians in Ukraine or whatever, I was like, well, if you look into the first Chechen war, if you look into the second Chechen war, if you look into Transnistria, if you look into Moldova, if you look into Kaliningrad, if you look into Belarus, if you look into Ukraine, if you look into Kazakhstan, if you look into Tanatuva, if you look into Dagestan, like if you look into Georgia, if I don't get into any of the specifics and show like a pattern of behavior here and connect it together with like, and like all you're doing is you're quite literally just throwing whatever you can at the wall and see if it sticks. Some of it could be bullshit. Some of it could not be bullshit. And we have nothing drawing this all together. It is very easy for me to believe that there are very wealthy people out there engaging in very depraved, horrific behavior with children. I can believe that. But I haven't seen anything that ties it all together into some vast conspiracy amongst the political elite, like Hillary Clinton and the other top echelons of society. This is something to engage in some like cult-like practice, or I've seen nothing like that. And so just giving a bunch of examples where very wealthy people have engaged in this type of depraved behavior and throwing out just a bunch of names, like, it's just, that proves nothing. You've proved nothing. You just basically told everybody to go do your own research. That's it.
Well, you don't?
No, I've not seen any evidence of that whatsoever.
So I just gave you all of these facts. I just gave you all these things that you can look up. And if you don't...
Again, he didn't give any facts. He just said a bunch of names. I mean, if somebody was like asking me, like, Dylan, why do you think that why do you think that Tyson Fury is the best boxer? I was like, well, Tyson Fury trained with this guy, and then he had this guy too, and he talked to this guy, and also this guy, and he fought at this arena, and he fought at this thing. Like, if I don't connect into like, well, this is the skills that he developed that are better than the rest here, like, that's not a case. You're just throwing a bunch of you're acting almost like a Pokédex that just throws out like a random Pokemon fact. You're not building a case.
Don't look it up. You're not doing your due diligence as a journalist.
Well, we can look up. So this is what's called the setting small fires conundrum. Okay. I have investigated Pizzagate and QAnon to a degree that I think is completely reasonable, and have looked at some, but not all of the things you just mentioned. The thing that becomes difficult is you are extremely skeptical of accepting any official source for any claim, but at the same time, you argue that if I'm not familiar with every proverbial small fire that you've just set, that certainly what you're saying must be true, even though you're also not citing any sources for these things. It's tough to have a real conversation when someone does that,
Well, look into the government website on the finders. This has been declassified. The CIA was trafficking children for satanic ritual abuse, keeping them in cages. They were abducting children off the street, and this was the whistle was blown by the FBI.
I'll look into that.
Okay,
I'll look into that.
Now look into the.
There was a CIA. The CIA was kidnapping American children to sacrifice to Satan ritualistically. To what end would that even be till? The CIA wanted to like have a vampire division. They wanted the evil power of Moloch. They wanted to be able to suck the souls out of the Iranians. What? Come on.
Franklin cover-up. That's where the rising Republican star Lawrence King was trafficking children out of CPS and forcing them into satanic rituals while they did cocaine and molested children. Okay, look into the Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino in charge of psychological warfare and mind control for the Army. Look into his scandals on military bases.
Listen, we can't possibly do all of these things here. What I will tell you is, but hold on, just as an example, we have to do this in a way that makes sense for the audience, Jake. Okay, so if you want to come back, give me the full list of stuff and we can investigate it. The one I've investigated that you mentioned is the Franklin conspiracy. There is essentially no credible evidence that what you just described is going on. It has been investigated deeply. There are documents people can find. We can't make this about Franklin conspiracy. You mentioned one I'm familiar with, and what I'm telling you is everything you've said is disputed and, in my opinion, not backed by evidence. Let me get to the second part. You believe a bunch of the first stuff I said. Do you believe Trump was sent by God to solve that problem?
I don't necessarily think that that is a accurate portrayal of. I think that we're all here on God's will, but I'll say that much.
Okay. Do you think Trump maybe was sent by God to deal with it?
Dude, I think everybody was sent here by God to do something.
Okay.
Why is that not an easy question to answer? The answer is yes. The answer is going to be yes. The answer is yes. He doesn't want to say yes because the idea of saying, yes, Trump was sent by God to beat up all the pedophiles out of the deep state is unbelievably silly. Definitely considering Donald Trump's noted history and friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. Not saying that he participated in any activities with Epstein, but I mean, he said he knew he liked him young.
But you have no evidence that Trump was sent here specifically to stop the ring of pedophilia you just described.
No, what kind of evidence would there be?
I don't know. I mean, I guess the same kind you're citing for all this other stuff, which is none.
Oh, give me a break, David.
Okay. Hey, so you're now running for a congressional seat. Talk to me about what is the platform? What are you bringing to the table? Why would you be a good member of Congress?
Because I'm actually going to represent the American people. The first four things that I'm going to introduce to the House floor is a single bill voting law, an amendment for term limits for congressmen and staff, a criminalization of lobbying, and 7-figure fines, expulsion, and prosecution for insider trading. And believe me, there's a much longer list to go along with that, but those are the first four things I intend to do.
Do you think that
I never liked term limits ideas. I never liked the idea of term limits. And this is something that I grew a distaste for very quickly on the local level. Because I realized how much a first term for a political figure or like a congressman or city councilor, county councilor or congressman is just learning the ropes of how to introduce legislation, meeting everybody, or learning the tricks of the trade, getting on your feet before you can really start to introduce any of the legislation. And once you're finally on your feet, generally your first term is ending, especially for Congress, because when we're talking about Congress, we're talking about 2-year terms. And the reason this creeped up on me is because we were talking about a 2-year term on the local level, on the city level. And if somebody wants to be a veteran legislator who knows how to get through legislation effectively, or even knows how to block legislation effectively, I really have no problem with that. I have no problem with having experienced multi-decade legislators in power. Take what would be solved through term limits exactly? I don't know exactly what would be solved through congressional and senatorial term limits, and what would the length of term limits be? Mitch McConnell would be solved? Well, when you say Mitch McConnell would be solved, are you angry that Mitch McConnell is so old? Because an age limit is different than a term limit. An age limit or a competency limit would be probably what it would be most, like some sort of limit where they have to take like certain like mental tests in order to make sure that they can continue, that they're still, all there. I'd be in favor of that. When we say term limit, I'm thinking like after 3 or 4 terms, you can no longer be a congressman. So we're talking about somebody in office for 8 years. You can get 8 years of experience. When a lot of times it is the veteran legislators who are going to have the most skill in not only having like good, healthy back and forth relationship and dialogue with other legislators across the aisle, but knowing how to get it through the different committee hearings, know how to get the bills passed not only through the House but through the Senate, knowing how to deal with alterations and adaptations to the bill, knowing the tricks of the trade, becoming people like Lyndon B. Johnson, the master of the Senate, who in large part due to the skills he built up in the trade of being in the Senate for so long and being in American politics for so long, was able to make a lot of big changes to our civil rights legislation. I mean, to our civil rights legacy, to, I mean, a lot of our country through his mastering of the Senate. And I don't really have a problem with that. I don't know what problem it solves. I don't know what the problem, I don't know what problem adding term limits solves.
Your criminal past is going to be useful or maybe hurtful in this campaign?
Well, the fact of the matter is I don't have a criminal past. I have one felony for which that is the only crime I've ever committed in my life. And no, I don't think it's going to be a hindrance whatsoever.
Why not? Don't you think that it's something that may make people say, well, hold on a second. Is this the sort of person we want representing us?
Well, you know, considering that all the people that are...
See, something like that, for somebody to talk about sevens in chat, you can make it consecutive term limits, like stay in office for 20 years without taking a break. Like something like that, at least I would be more okay with. But if somebody's doing a good job and they're doing a good job for 20 years, I don't want to just kick them out to possibly replace them with somebody who's going to do a worse job just because term limit said so. I can understand it from the position of the chief executive because you don't want any one president to have too much power. But I don't feel the same way about Congress or the Senate.
Quote unquote representing the American people right now are probably criminals themselves, considering all the insider trading and all the cocaine and orgies then all the hookers that they hire. Then, right. You know, I probably don't see that is going to be a problem at all.
All right. Well, we're going to follow it with interest. A couple other things I want to talk about. You know, I don't want to simply and flippantly ascribe the label conspiracy theorist to you, because it can sometimes be a label that just stops conversation, and I want to have a conversation. But I do want to ask you about some other beliefs and see sort of like, what is the network of beliefs? You've talked to us a little bit about QAnon. It has been said by prosecutors that you believe you are an alien or a higher being of some kind. Is that true? Is that a belief you hold?
As a shamanic practitioner, I have a hyperdimensional consciousness that stretches far beyond the bounds of my physical body.
So that's a yes, it sounds like.
Well, do you know what a bodhisattva is?
Generally speaking, yeah. Sort of a spiritual figure of sorts that people may follow, yeah.
Well, kind of. It's a spiritual being that attains a certain level of enlightenment, but reincarnates over and over again consciously until the all of humanity is enlightened and brought into an ascended level of consciousness. I am a bodhisattva.
All right, so it's...
Yeah, I noticed I was slipping into that the other day. Yeah, I noticed that I was making coffee, and I felt myself slipping into that.
Sounds like you do believe you are a higher being of sorts.
Well, I think we all have the capacity to be quote unquote higher beings. I think we all are higher beings. I'm just more conscious of it than others.
Fair. When it comes to vaccination, I read, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you were discharged from the military for refusing an anthrax vaccination. I'm curious, are you, assuming that's true, and you'll tell me if it's not, are you against all vaccines or only certain ones?
Well, what I'm against is trusting people that have openly espoused their eugenic beliefs to manufacture vaccines for the mass populations of the planet. And considering the Rockefeller family and considering people like Bill Gates, who are behind a lot of these vaccines, are admitted eugenicists, I don't trust them one little bit at all to give me or anybody a vaccine.
So it's not that you reject the science of vaccination as a principle.
It's that the American government has made vaccination contracts for American soldiers that would have them being injected with eugenics juice, which would either kill them or make it so they can't have children. I feel like we would have noticed this by now. But I don't know, man. They're really secretive. That Bill Gates guy, he's pretty tricky, man.
Inoculation. You just don't like who's making the vaccines because you believe that they have genocidal goals?
The principle behind vaccines is sound for the most part. However, the ingredients that are being put in modern vaccines by these eugenicist-owned companies are detrimental to human health.
Like what ingredient?
Oh, things like, formaldehyde, things like dead fetal tissue, things like, mercury-based compounds that penetrate the blood-brain barrier, all sorts of stuff that's in there, preservatives for the microbiological life forms.
Oh, hey,
There's all sorts of stuff in these vaccines. Just look at the list and look at the ingredients.
But you know that, I mean, again,
vaccines.
Jacob, we can't do every single one of these. But like the dead fetal tissue in vaccines, you know that that's not true. There were stem cell lines obtained from fetal tissue used to research and develop the vaccines. But you're suggesting like they're injecting a piece of a dead baby into everybody. That's crazy. You've got to see that that's crazy.
No. You see, you're clearly not doing your research, but that's okay.
I've researched. Tell me where I'm wrong.
Debate you on it right now.
Which I'm sorry, you said you're not equipped to debate me on that right now.
No. What I'm saying is that because of our time constraints, dude, I'll argue into the 9th hour, but our time constraints won't allow it.
But what you're to be clear, I'm saying pieces.
How would you administer dead baby to a patient? How exactly would you do that? How would you do it? I mean, if you do it through vaccine, it would have to be an unbelievably small amount of fetal tissue. I don't know what it would even accomplish. So would you? How would you administer dead fetal tissue? Through a spoon, like a spoonful, like a capsule, maybe. I don't know. How would you? I'd have no clue.
Of dead babies are not an ingredient in.
Maybe they have all the like fetuses in like a big broth. And like in a big cauldron administered by the hospital witch.
The vaccines, you're saying that they are.
No, what I'm saying is dead fetal tissue.
Yes.
As in cells from dead babies.
Tissue, right.
Okay,
It's part of a dead baby.
Used, and that also goes into our food. That goes into our food as well. So it's like, you can't deny it. The science is there.
Yeah.
This is what these pharmaceutical
science, man. Come on, Pac.
do.
Okay, I think it can be denied on the basis that there's no evidence for it, but it sounds like we're not necessarily.
God, man, I love Pakman sometimes, man. Man. Sometimes I'll see like a short clip on Twitter and be like, man, I don't like that thing. That's annoying. But there's something just so lovely about listening to him tell the QAnon shaman, like, sorry, I have to reject that based upon the fact that there's no evidence. It's so simple, so direct, so beautiful.
Say about the election too.
Right. I think Joe Biden won. That's true.
Oh yeah, I'm sure you do.
Yeah. Hey, in the limited time we have left, do you regret what you did on January 6th? Aside from, I know you've said, you've already talked a little bit about it, and you said you're responsible, etc. Would everybody have been better off, including you, if you had just never gone on that day?
I think everybody in the country would be better off if the government didn't set things up the way that they did.
Wow, what a beautiful answer. What a beautiful non-answer.
But did they set you up to go? Because you've taken responsibility. You went because you wanted to go. So why is it that now you blame the government?
I know. What I'm saying, dude, is that it was a setup on behalf of the deep state. If they allowed the National Guard to be there, it never would have happened. Okay. And regarding this notion of regrets, I don't regret anything in life, even though I've made several mistakes, because regret is far too heavy a burden to carry forward into the future. You can either make a mistake and not learn from it, or you can make a mistake and learn from it. And then at that point, it's not a mistake, it's a lesson. And I've learned many lessons throughout my life, and I am better for it.
Are there any lessons you learned from being there on January 6th that are about you rather than about, like, I know you could very easily say, well, I learned how powerful the deep state is. Okay, that's a dead end for our conversation. Are there any lessons about you that you learned from having been there that day?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
And what lesson is that?
That I'm far stronger than I could have possibly imagined, and God is guiding me in every single footstep I take.
Amen, brother.
All right.
Amen.
I think that is a good note to end our interview on. We've been speaking with Jake Angeli Chansley, who is not only
How hard would it be How hard would it be to convince the QAnon shaman that he can cast spells? How hard would it be? I mean, he already believes a lot of weird and crazy stuff about, you know, his ability to enter multi dimensions. He's evolving to the next plane and all this stuff. Do you think we could get him to like get angry during an interview and go fireball, or just, I don't know. God, man. If I was still doing hippy tippy roundtable, oh, you'd know I'd try. You'd know I'd try to get him a front row seat. He'd be first in line, man, first in line.